I said the last 2 years have been difficult for small businesses. We've seen rising freight prices, challenges securing space on ships, planes, trains, and trucks. We've seen really, really slow transit times, and that's really manifested into issues with inventory for a lot of merchants. And so the key question has really become: if supply chain is really hard, how can you turn that into a advantage for your business? And how can it become a way that you actually differentiate for your customers? So flipping that script, and instead of being a victim of the volatility, a victim of the disruption, how can you actually make good decisions and turn it into an advantage? And so that's really the question that we're going to answer here today: is how do you take back control? How do you make good decisions in the face of volatility? And how do you end up making that a winning thing for your business? But before we get into that, we're going to spend a little bit of time anchoring ourselves into where we are today in the ocean freight markets and the air freight markets. And then we're going to build on that. We're going to use that information to inform the type of advice that we're giving to merchants today. So let's dive into ocean freight first. The big thing to remember with ocean freight is that it's a very complicated ecosystem of players. And when you get imbalances in supply and demand, that has ripple effects throughout the rest of the system. One of the questions that we get all the time is, why are there so many ships sitting outside LA? And the honest answer is because of compounding effects. When you actually use that LA example to sort of illustrate the point, you can see what I mean. When we get record consumer spending in the US, that leads to rising freight prices. Those rising freight prices lead carriers to deploy more capacity onto those profitable trades, like the Trans-Pacific trade into LA. And then that leads to record-setting volumes. But to absorb those record-setting volumes, you need the other nodes along the supply chain to scale too, things like labor or physical infrastructure like warehouse space and chassis. And if those things don't scale with the pace of demand, then what we get instead is congestion. And that congestion leads to vessel delays. Those vessel delays lead to equipment shortages, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So if we actually look at what all of this has created when we sort of take stock of our US port system, and this data was pulled last week, so it's probably updated from here. But what we have is actually record transit times, and that's not a good way that we're using the word record. We're talking about 114 days from cargo ready dates to destination port departure. And in this sort of an environment, it's almost impossible for importers to make accurate decisions about inventory. And so you can look at each of the ports, how many vessels were waiting, and what the average dwell time looks like outside those ports. And then on the right, you can see how that's changed over time. And you can just see the sharp increase that we've experienced in the last 2 years. And if we look at the air freight market, we can see that there's a very similar supply and demand situation, but it's caused by different factors. When you look at air capacity, you're really thinking of it in two different ways. You have air capacity that's generated by freighters, so flights that are dedicated to air freight, and then you have air capacity that actually goes on passenger flights, so in the belly of passenger planes. And you can look at how those different sources of capacity have changed over the past 2 years. And the notable line is that the passenger cargo was actually the largest source of air tonnage pre-pandemic, and then it just cratered. And we don't expect that capacity to come back anytime soon. And so the net effect of this is that we've actually seen a 7% reduction in total tonnage for air freight capacity. And then we have seen demand at high levels. So you can look to the right and you can see that, between 32%, 25%, 9% growth, we are in a situation again where demand is outstripping supply. So as an importer, you're sort of faced with this really tough situation. It kind of feels like you're in between a rock and a hard place. Rising freight costs and volatile transit times means that you have to choose between paying more for something like air freight or premium ocean services, which means that you potentially lose margin on your product, or putting your inventory at risk. defaulting to standard services that have become less reliable. And what that can turn into is lost sales or lower revenue. And so neither one of these situations feels like where you want to be. So what we have been doing is trying to advise our customers on how to feel like you're taking back control and avoiding this difficult decision between lost margin or lost sales, because that's not what anybody wants. People want to be growing and profiting, like I mentioned at the beginning. So let's talk about how you can actually win in the face of disruption, how you can look at this set of facts and not have to face that trade-off between lost margin or lost sales. How do you get ahead and make this a good thing for your business? The long and short of it is that there is no perfect single answer. If there was, everybody would just be doing that and we wouldn't have a problem. So if it was simple, then it wouldn't be a topic of conversation. But you can find small wins. And if you work hard at these things, and if you work with good partners, these small wins can stack together and have a huge outcome for your business. So I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to talk about some of these small wins that, if you stitch them together, can yield dramatically better results for your company, especially if you're a small business in the e-commerce space. So the first one I want to talk about is making sure that you're working with your supplier and your freight forwarding partner to book early. And I'll talk about why that's so important. But what we are recommending is that you book at least 4 weeks ahead of your cargo ready date for ocean shipments and at least 2 weeks ahead of your cargo ready date for air shipments. And the reason why is that your freight forwarding partner, or whoever is procuring that space for you, is dealing with a supply constrained market. And the more visibility and lead time you can give your partner to plan for that cargo, the faster they're going to be able to get that to depart after your cargo ready date. So this is a clear example of where planning actually manifests into faster transit times. And specifically, it helps you minimize the time between cargo ready date and actual time of departure. So if you are not booking early, it is one of the easiest things for you to do as an importer to change the dynamic between cargo ready date and actual time of departure. And the second part of this statement up top, which is on each booking, you should consider putting fewer TEUs or CBMs, depending on what mode you're booking. And this is all about diversification of risk. So when you look at one of the most difficult things to navigate, it's the fact that ocean sailing schedules or even flight schedules haven't always held. And it comes for sort of different dynamics. In the ocean world, it's oftentimes because there are vessel delays getting back. But in the second half of 2021, only 85% of sailing schedules actually held, and the rest were canceled or blanked. And so let's just play this out as an example. Let's say that you had one booking and you put 5 containers on that booking. Well, if you did that, there was a 15% chance that whatever vessel it was booked on wouldn't actually go, and that your freight forwarder or someone else would be looking for a new sailing potentially weeks later to load that cargo. Conversely, if you had split those 5 containers over 3, 4, maybe even 5 bookings, you could have diversified, placed them across multiple vessels, and chances are that 4 out of the 5 would have departed. And as a small business especially, the difference between getting 80% of your inventory on time versus potentially not getting any of your inventory on time is massive. So this is all about pre-planning and diversification of risk. But if anybody here is not booking early and is not spreading out their volume across multiple bookings, I would highly recommend both of those strategies as a way to make sure that you're doing a better job getting your inventory when you expect it. The second one that I want to focus on is flexibility at destination. When we've been looking at congestion, especially in the United States, It would be easier to deal with if the congestion was always at the same node, but it's not. Congestion moves around. Sometimes it could be at the rail yard, other times it could be at cross docks or at terminals. And so you need to be in constant conversation with your freight forwarding partner, and you need to be adaptable and iterative on how you manage the destination side of your shipment, whether that's leveraging rail or leveraging transloads, or leveraging even long dray options. But you really need to think shipment to shipment and work with your freight forwarder to avoid nodes of congestion and steer your shipments towards options to get inland, that are going to be more performant. So that's another one that we would definitely recommend. And then the last one that I'm going to focus on here is leveraging consolidations. And in particular, I want to talk about a very unique consolidation service actually that Flexport built in partnership with ShipBob, to give an example of what we're talking about. But when we talk about consolidations, what we're really meaning here is less than container load ocean shipments. And this can work really well for companies that can prioritize their SKUs. So maybe you have certain SKUs that are selling faster or are at higher risk of going out of stock, or that are just more important to your customers. And if you can really differentiate amongst those SKUs, you can start to get really creative with how you book out your SKUs and leveraging consolidated services that can sometimes come with faster transit times, less costs, so on and so forth. And so what we did with ShipBob was we created actually a dedicated program for ShipBob customers called Flexport Flow Direct. And we did this to help merchants who had really hot SKUs, priority SKUs that they wanted to move faster, more reliably, and at lower cost when compared to air freight or premium FCL. And so we kind of put it out there and we said, how would we solve this problem? And we started working on this in advance of Black Friday, because ShipBob had merchants. They said, we've got a bunch who are at risk of missing Black Friday. How can we make sure that we can get their product here in time to make sales? So what we did was we created this program, and it was unbelievable. I mean, we moved a container from China all the way to dock door at ShipBob's Southern California FC. We did it in 15 days. And we did it by creating a dedicated container for ShipBob merchants. And we loaded it on a fast boat that called a less congested terminal in LA. Because it was all ShipBob merchants, we were able to skip over the traditional deconsolidation step and deliver that direct to dock door. ShipBob, as a great partner, prioritized the receipt of that container, and those merchants were able to hit their Black Friday sales. And so it's this type of innovative thinking that you're going to need from partners when you're trying to achieve a business objective and dealing with the volatility in this market. Because if you're working with the right people, you really can find solutions. So those are all some practical tips, things that you could go out and take action on, today, if you wanted to try to get better outcomes for your end customers and really take back some control over your supply chain. And I always want to leave you, whenever I get a chance, with the ability to celebrate some of our great customers. So this is just a quick shout out to one of my favorite companies. It's called She's Birdie. They have a fantastic team there and a fantastic product, and it was my favorite gift to give over the holidays. So I'll leave you with this quick story about She's Birdie. But Fran, back to you for any Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. We actually have a bunch of birdies that we ordered to the office. Like a bunch of girls ordered them. They're awesome. So that's cool that you guys work with them. It goes full circle, as you can see, from consumer, now working with a partner, figuring out that She's Birdie was sent by a partner. So that's awesome. I'm not sure if we have any Q&A session or Q&A questions. If anyone has any for Ted, pop them in the chat now, and we'll hold for like 20 seconds. But if not, or if you have anything specific, you can join. I'll pop this in here. Flexport's booth, where you can ask more specific questions as well as get a special offer from them, or go to their website to connect with them. But I don't think there's any questions coming in, so we should be good, Ted. Thank you so much. Those are very insightful tips. I never knew that people could split up their inventory into different shipments, and that'd be a way to avoid the disruptions, because most people just want to get it one and done. So I think you gave the attendees a lot to think about to rock 2022.
Well, thank you all so much. And if you have any questions, you can always reach me on LinkedIn or reach out to Flexport, and we'd be happy to take care of you. But thanks again to our partners at ShipBob. You all have been truly fantastic to work with.
Thanks, Ted.